Welcome to Straight Talk with me, Peter Martin, on PLZ Soccer's YouTube channel. I'm delighted to say my special guest this week is one of the most respected sports journalists in Scottish football. Roddy Forsyth is with me. Roddy, I've been trying for such a long time for us to finally get a date to get together. Usually we're sitting in a press box in a working capacity, but I'm delighted you're here as a guest because you've got such a rich tapestry of not only written word, but obviously you have been the voice on so many BBC programmes, so many BBC occasions when they're covering football, that I wanted to get an insight from you. Which did you enjoy the most?
I couldn't say because, as you know, when you're working to deadlines and when you're working with particular topics, as you close each chapter, that's great for you. So I've seen myself doing, and we were talking about this before we came on air, I think I'm the only reporter who ever did a radio commentary on an Old Firm game while at the same time doing 2 Sunday pieces for newspapers. And there's an art to doing all of that. And it's stressful at the time, but it's a kind of enjoyable stress. It's enjoyable as long as you make it work.
Yeah.
It's not enjoyable the moment you don't. But when you, as you know, when you pull off the right interview or an exclusive or whatever it may be, or something that people respond to, that pleases you.
And with that in mind, do you think it was easier to do that because you had put so much work into mastering the basic skills of each?
Well, I was looking back a while ago, and when I was at school, I grew up in Maryhill in Glasgow, where the fire station is on Maryhill Road now. We were in a slummy bit, and I say that carefully because the building was slummy, but the households weren't. People kept their houses clean. I grew up between 2 pubs. One of them was called the HLI, named after the Highland Light Infantry, because they were stationed at Maryhill Barracks. and a mate called Louis. And I don't know how we decided to do this, but we were about 7 or 8 years old, and we had jotters with squares in them. That was for doing your sums. And I undid the staples in the middle of the jotter and took out pages and wrote in all the football fixtures for that day. And at 5 o'clock, when the scores used to be announced on radio, I wrote all the scores in. Then we had 3 or 4 copies. We took them into the pub and sold them for 2p each. Now, at that point, it was 2 old pennies as well, but you could buy a lot of sweeties with that. And the thing was that what was happening was that the guys in the pub wanted to check their pools coupons, and they had to wait until the papers came in, so the Evening Times, the Pink Times or the Green Citizen. So effectively we were a wee app 60 years before our time, or 50 years, whatever it was. So there are things, and I also remember my grandparents lived in Maryhill. They lived in Burnhouse Street at the corner of Kelvindale Avenue, and there was a school opposite. And my grandmother had one of those mirror and brush sets, which were like the old microphones. And when we were up there on a Saturday for our tea, I used to sit in the back bedroom, which had a bay window overlooking school, and it was always Scotland versus England, doing the commentary. Whoever was winning was Scotland. Sometimes Scotland changed sides during a game, you know. So, but you wonder, why do you do that? Is there something in you that's there from an early age that you don't realise is going to take you onto a career? Yeah,
well, subconsciously, you're probably being an entrepreneur selling your, your scores. But over and above that, in a way, it's like somebody who's, a Kenny Dalglish going out and playing street football and he's mastering his art. Mm-hmm. In a way, as a youngster, you're doing it and you're not, you would never know that 10, 15, 20 years on, it's going to be your career.
Yeah, well, I was also helpful in that regard that I lived between, where the fire station is now is exactly halfway between Firhill and Lochburn Park, and that's where Maryhill Juniors play. So almost every Saturday, and of course it was the days when we were lifted over the turnstiles. And the first ever autograph I got was Dick State. He was a guy, he was a centre. He played for both teams, Partick Thistle and Maryhill Juniors. And he went on, typically for a Partick Thistle player, or typically for the club, he went on to become Sir Richard State. He's still alive, and he became knighted for services to education. He became a headmaster. And when I actually packed this game in officially, I mentioned him on radio, and he got in touch almost immediately. So there you are. Wow. The circle was completed.
And how or what influenced you to suddenly suggest, so did somebody put the notion in your mind, journalism, broadcasting, or, how did it come about?
Well, at school, I edited a couple of magazines that weren't official. There was one called The Informer. And I discovered that teachers, which was amazed me at the time, wanted to tell you stuff about other teachers. Including who was having a fling with who. You couldn't never put that in. But that was banned, the headmaster banned that after we put a joke in. And the joke was, "Mummy, mummy, can I lick the bowl? No, pull the chain like everybody else." I told you the other joke that we had to put in, I won't even hint at what it was, but if that had gone in, I'd have been expelled. So that was The Informer. And then when I got into 5th or 6th year, I did one called Acid Drops, because I was acid at the time. Not that I was taking any.
No.
It was a good title. And again, teachers were coming and saying, "Do you know, that department doesn't work well, and do you know why it doesn't work well, blah, blah, blah." So they were all reading it. And at one point, the headmaster banned it and said, "You have to get all the copies back and give the money back that you got for it." And there was teachers sending kids to get their money, but they weren't sending the copies. So somewhere there are people with copies of Acid Drops. And so, so something in you, there must be something in you that tells you want to do that. I mean, you presumably know that yourself.
Yeah, I was going to say to you, was it an easy industry to get into? How did it all come about for you?
I tried and tried when I left school to get into the business, and it was the days where you had to send stamped addressed envelopes. You bought, for those who don't know what a stamped addressed envelope is, you got an envelope and addressed it to yourself, and you put a stamp on it, and you put it inside the letter you were sending to somebody else so that they didn't have to spend money on the reply. And I got a thing called Willing's A to Z Press Guide, and I started at A and doing the Scottish papers, so Aberdeenshire journals. And although a lot of these newspapers were very opinionated about the behaviour of young people, they don't do this and they don't do that, very few of them actually took the trouble to reply. DC Thomson's did and said no, they didn't have any vacancies. But my mother used to get the People's Friend, Coothie magazine for women, and I noticed that they had an advert one day if you were over 21 and wanted to write stories, women's stories. So I wrote them, said, "I'm not over 21, I don't want to write women's stories, but I'd really like to be a reporter." And this time they got back and said, "Come for an interview." So I started in the Dundee and the Evening Tilly, the Telegraph and the Courier. And I lived in Dundee and had to master that Emma Waffer bent accent. And that was how it started, and I worked there, and they sent me up to Aberdeen at the start of when the oil boom was in full flow. And it was an astounding place to work, because if you went into the pub for a pint, you would be next to Vietnam fighter pilots and things like this, that had been in the American Air Force and so on. So it was a very lively start, and I worked as a news reporter for a few years, and then I was on the Herald, and I discovered that Eddie Roger, who was the sports editor, was always looking for people who might do games for him, and I was thinking the likes of maybe a First Division game or whatever. And he asked me to do a friendly between Rangers and Bayern Munich. So that's good. Because as you know, football reporters don't like doing friendlies.
Yeah.
There's enough to do without doing that. So I went along, and it turned out that the Herald had an arrangement with the BBC Scotland, that if you were going to Ibrox or Celtic or Hampden, you took a bit of kit called a Kubi. Do you remember Kubis?
No.
Commentator-operated broadcast equipment.
Right.
To plug them in, much like you do now, but much with wiring and all the rest of it. So I went and did that, and there was a phone number you had to phone to get through to the BBC, and then the lines were put up, engineers were on it. So I did the game. It was a very eventful game, and got home. And when I got home, the assistant producer phoned me and said, "Do you go to football a lot, or do you go?" I said, "I try and go when I can." He said, "Would you like to work for us, do a game on a Saturday for us?" And one thing led to another.
By the way, I mean, isn't it amazing that there's a sliding doors moment in your life?
Oh, there is, yes. And it was just that moment. And the attraction of doing football at the time was, first of all, I would have been watching it anyway. So you were getting paid instead of paying to do it. But also there was the fact that as I began to do more and more, and then there was the possibility of doing it, not maybe full-time, but as a freelance with regular guaranteed work. One of the attractions, and again you have to explain this to people who are below a certain age, because until the 1990s Europe was divided into the Eastern Bloc, the Warsaw Pact countries and so on. Now some of them didn't let tourists in, or visitors in, but the rules of football coverage meant that they had to allow, if you wanted to see Moscow, if you were playing Moscow Dynamo and your team was going over there, they had to allow the Scottish media to come in, and you had to allow their media. So I got to see places that I would never have seen otherwise. And To give you an example, I was once in Kiev, when it was still part of the Soviet Union, and went for a walk one evening. And these cities weren't full of nightclubs or attractions or pubs or things like that, bars. They were very austere cities. And I passed a shop which sold white goods, washing machines, hoovers, things like that. And in the window, there weren't any goods, but there were pictures of what would be there if they could get them.
Oh, wow.
Because it was a command economy, and they didn't just make washing machines because people wanted them. You know? And they always said that if you drove a Jaguar across Russia and the Soviet Union, nobody would steal it, but if you had a ladder, it'd be as soon as you were in your hotel room, it'd be away. So the attraction of travelling, and as you know yourself, that's one of the joys of the job. Sometimes it's one of the joys. It can be wearying as well. But to get to see lots of places you never would otherwise have turned up in and see how people live.
Yeah, and the other thing that intrigues me about yourself, and I know a lot of people will probably have come into contact with you and you will have passed on your knowledge. I would not be the journalist I am without experience of people who've given me the best bits of things to look out for. Was there somebody in the early days in the broadcasting maybe that gave you little tips or you looked towards and admired?
Well, I worked for a producer called Murdoch McPherson. It wasn't so much he wanted to give you tips, but he was a mine of information. He was an extraordinary man. There was a programme called Songs of Praise. He was an ordained Church of Scotland minister. And he did that, but then he also produced sports programmes, Sports Sound, Sports Scene, various others. And I remember one day, he also did a programme called Leisure Trail, and he asked me if I'd like to present it. It was on early in the morning on a Saturday. It was from 7 o'clock till 9:30. And they had a fellow called Brian Marshbanks, who is the father of the current Brian Marshbanks.
Yes.
Both football reporters, and he had him doing the sport after 9 o'clock. I was hosting the programme. And there was a fellow who did birds. People wrote in and asked, I've got a bird in my garden doing this, is it a such and such? And on this particular morning, I always remember this being the mentalness of broadcasting. Murdoch had seen an article in the Bartonshire paper about a woman who had gone blind. She was from Mull, I think. And her husband had bought her for a big birthday, what do you call those cycles that two people can ride on? Tandems.
A tandem, yeah.
So he bought a tandem so that she could get out and cycle again. Because she'd always loved cycling, but now she couldn't do it.
Yeah.
But she could if she was sitting in the back seat with him. So Murdoch had wanted them to come up. And he was very particular about when you were on the programme, so he put them in for 7:20. And they'd had to find a call box, because it was 4 mobile phones, and say that the car had broken down. They were coming up by car. So Murdoch decided he would put them back on at some point if ever they could make it. So we were just doing the bird sequence with a fellow called Peter Boyer. He was the guy who did it. When Murdoch sent her in, so she's a Scotland. Remember, she can't see, so I can't make any eye contact with her.
Yeah.
So I'm sitting, because Peter normally just did his 5 minutes, and I just waited till it's finished. Murdoch suddenly said, we'll call her Alice, bring Alice into the discussion. I said, well, there's Peter describing a tree creeper. Do you do much bird watching when you're cycling? At this point, I see Murdoch, the coffee cup hitting the studio window. He's going, how can she go bird watching? She's blind. She can hear this. You know? I've still got the tape. You can hear it coming out of the headphones.
Did she see the funny side of it?
She did,
yeah.
Afterwards. But Murdoch's just pointing at me and going, the engineer's fallen off his seat, by the way. He'd been sitting with his feet up. And the studio window's just dripping with coffee. Anyway, I have the chills. I've got the cold sweat. I think I've finished myself on radio. And at a few minutes from the end, Murdoch comes on again. He says, good news. The Highlands and Islands Development Board have got cassettes of birdsong precisely for blind bird watchers or blind bird fanciers. We'll give away 6 next week. Just trail that. So I trailed it, and I still was sweating, and they came in and said, wonderful. And I realised that radio can be quite mental.
Yes.
It's just what gets you through any 5 minutes at a time. So.
Although, typical BBC, how to offset a catastrophe.
Oh, yes.
Damage limitation. Was there a point where the writing or the broadcasting started to take prominence in your life?
They were both about the same time.
What year was that?
About 1980. And what happened was the BBC was full of parcels of programmes. It still is to some extent. So that what happened was that I was doing a programme called Good Morning Scotland, which is just coming off the air after 40 years. And I was doing the sport on that, 7:20, 8:20 in the morning. And I always tried to finish with something funny. And that got us in trouble once because a woman wrote in to say that the man, she'd been in traffic at traffic lights in her car. And the man behind had been laughing at something that said and hadn't put his brakes on properly and ran into her. Oof. So we were part of an insurance claim. But as I say, it was bits and pieces. So you did 5 mornings a week, Good Morning Scotland. On a Saturday, it was Radio 2. And on a Wednesday night, it was Radio 2. So you weren't working for BBC Scotland at that point. Guys like Ian Archer, do you remember him?
Oh, yes.
They were doing this. And so I kind of inherited this bit full of bits and pieces. And there was also the World Service. And there was also British Forces Broadcasting, BFBS, all going through the BBC. So you ended up being, if you did that job, although it was fragmentary, you actually became the voice of Scottish football outside Scotland.
Yes.
People in Scotland weren't listening to it very much because they had Radio Clyde, Radio Scotland, so on. But this became... So when I started travelling with the job properly, you would find yourself, especially when you were going to far-flung places, invited by the embassies to come and join them for a drink or come and have a bite to eat with the ambassadors because they were listening.
Yes.
So it was a strange existence. Not many people in Scotland were listening to Radio 2 at that point as a sports network.
Yeah.
But it was listened to in England, so all the Scots in England were listening to it. And especially the expats down working in London. And then those in the servicemen, British soldiers, sailors, Air Force men and such like that. So from that point of view, it was I hadn't expected, I didn't know that was what was going to happen.
How easy was it, or how... Did it favour you? I mean, a boy from Maryhill, but the way you were able to enunciate, did it help with the fact that you could broadcast out with the Scottish audience? Yes. You know, because I always associate you more often than not. Yes, you're a written journalist as well, but I always associate you with Roddy Forsyth, there's 5 Live, because you're UK wide. Mm-hmm. And you know, many a Scot has struggled to make that jump from Scotland, you know, to across the UK. Maybe because of their accent or whatever, or people are just not happy with the way somebody presents. But you seem to have that universal appeal with your voice.
Well, I grew up in Maryhill and I talk like that.
Yeah, did you work at it? That's what I was thinking.
I was saying to Charlie Nicholas came from Maryhill as well. And we were talking about the gangs one day and the fact that I learned how to walk round corners wide, if you heard. I'll give you a wee view in case it was. And the Maryhill fleet were the main crew at that time. And he said, I got chased by the Maryhill fleet. I said, did you get away? He says, aye. I says, how slow must the Maryhill fleet have been? He had a good grace to laugh. But you did have to watch out, and if you spoke a certain way when you were in the shops or whatever, people sometimes pick you up. So you learned, it was maybe more that I learned to speak that way.
Yeah.
Up the stairs, man, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. And
because at home, my mother, although she came again from slums, as did my father, they were quite well spoken. They wanted you to speak properly.
Yes.
So, but you had to learn how not to speak properly if you were going to be okay in the streets.
It's the art of survival, isn't it?
Especially if you were playing football in the back courts and things like that, you know.
Yeah. So. Let me talk about the football, because as well as the fact that you have broadcast continually in a domestic sense, you will have travelled the world, as you mentioned there, going to the Eastern Bloc countries and watching some great teams. You mentioned it was around about 1980. You're coming into a period where maybe Celtic and Rangers are not as dominant as they once were. There's a real transition going on in Scottish football. So at that point, were you lucky enough to be able to be in the Dundee United and Aberdeen camp and sample that as well, especially since your experience in Dundee and Aberdeen newspapers?
The best week I ever worked, and it was very early, I was only a young reporter, but I went with Aberdeen to the Winners' Cup final. I'd started covering that tournament, the quarter-finals when they beat Bayern Munich, and the best game I've ever seen at Pittodrie. The place was literally rocking, literally. I wondered if the walls were going to come down. I went on the Monday to Gothenburg, with Aberdeen. We came back on the Thursday with the Cup Winners' Cup, and there's the famous photograph of the champagne being poured into it. It was passed round in the days when you could do this. Everybody had a sip out of the Cup Winners' Cup. Then we landed at Aberdeen, and Ian Taggart was the secretary in those days. Do you remember Ian?
Yep.
Very helpful guy. But he wanted to be down ahead of the traffic at Pittodrie because they were going to bring the Cup Winners' Cup down Union Street and into Pittodrie. So he and I drove in my car down, and you heard people saying, Farzad. Oh, I don't know who that is. So we got to Pittodrie, and there was a BBC engineer he set up, so I did the commentary.
Brilliant.
Then I drove home, so that was the Thursday night. I drove home to Glasgow, and I thought, right, Saturday, Dundee United are playing at Dens Park. I thought, I better go up there and see Jim tomorrow. And it was the days before faxes. So the next morning I just drove up to Tannadice. And when I got there, strangely quiet. But one of the lads says, oh, he's in his office. So I went up and knocked the door. What do you want? I said, well, I'm sorry to bother you. I said, but you're playing at Dens tomorrow and it's such a big occasion. I've come up to see you. I said, I'm sorry if I'm late or I'm early. I said, well, I was with Aberdeen and I told him what I'd been doing. I said, and I didn't know what you were doing this morning, so I just come out. He says, well, come and sit down. So I said...
In his own inimitable style.
So I'm fixing up my big Ure tape recorder, thing that was heavier than I was. Fixing up, and I said, did you get many people this morning? He says, nobody came. Now, I've never established the truth of this because you can't believe that nobody would turn up at Tannadice the day before they could win the league. And yet, maybe because of Aberdeen, so much had been devoted to that. So I said to him, well, I've come, and when you win, not if, when you win the league tomorrow, will you do me? And if you ever watch the pictures of Jim of United win the league, he gets up out of his seat and he does that.
Yes.
And he walks. And that's him coming up. And he walked past Radio Scotland, David Francie and all the rest. And he came up and he was as good as his word. And he could be, I know this will surprise you. Surprise anybody that knew Jim. He could be quite funny when the notion took him in a kind of crazy way. We were at Barcelona in that game. Dundee United are the only team ever to have played Barcelona 4 times and beaten them in every game.
Yeah.
So
were you in the 2-1 game over there?
Mm-hmm.
Ah, brilliant.
And my favourite football chant was at that game because there was maybe 500 Dundee United supporters sitting away up on the top, 9th floor, singing "Bring on the Forfar." Because they played Forfar in a cup replay on the Saturday, which they only just made it. Anyway, we'd been playing. Do you remember we used to play press games?
Yes, oh, absolutely.
We would play the Dundee United management or whatever management it was. Walter used to play when it was Rangers and so on. So we'd been playing the media game at the Little New Camp, and we went into the canteen to have a bite to eat, and then it was back on the bus, and I was sitting up the front of the bus as I usually did. And the bus is just reversing, and suddenly I see wee Jim and he's coming in, he's got a bit of paper like that. So I tell the driver to stop, we open the doors, Jim goes, "This is for you." So it's a bit of paper folded over and it says, "Result of press dope test." And when I opened it, it said 11 dopes, and he was so pleased with himself.
But he did have a low, I mean, you'll have interviewed everyone in their granny in that United camp. You know, the amount of times that they had big victories, and Jim just didn't let their hair down. You know, he was but he did have that side. I mean, I remember as a young reporter going up for STV, and he took me around. He took me around the whole place, and he was as nice as you could ever wish for.
As long as you didn't cross him.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was wondering, what was your relationship? You mentioned Jim. What was your relationship like with Fergie?
I was again lucky because I had worked in Aberdeen for DC Thompson's Courier and Tilly. I made friends up there who are friends to this day. I've got friends who live in a wee fishing village to the north of Aberdeen called Colliston. Beautiful little place. So when I was going up to do an Aberdeen Rangers, Aberdeen Celtic or Aberdeen Dundee United match, they were the 3 that you wanted to do, I would stay over on the Sunday and go into Pittodrie on the Monday, and you would get Fergie, and he would just love to talk to people. And you would get the bowl of soup. I remember once going in the Pittodrie Street entrance, further up, opposite the car park entrance, and there used to be a door you could open. I was walking down the corridor, and there was a cupboard. And the cupboard started to open. I thought, and when I got there was a guy that, at that time I thought he was an old guy, he's probably younger than I am now. He's going, "Shh, son. So what is it?" He goes, "Fergie about." I says, "Well, I don't see him." He goes, "Is that door open up there?" I said, "Aye." So he went, I said, "What is it?" He goes, they're wanting everybody to play heady football and I can't do it. So, apparently Fergie and Archie Knox, and I spoke to them both about this subsequently, and they did used to organise heady and they were very, very competitive. So even if you were 60 and a clerk that had come in to do the accounts, you were drafted in, you know.
Yeah.
So these people were getting the benefit of Fergie and Knox battering away at them.
Yeah.
A guy hiding in a cupboard. But Fergie, I remember, he used to invite you into his office. I've had the bowler suit treatment a few times, but one that I always remember was he went out, instead of, he used to just phone through and get the bowler suit, but he disappeared for a few minutes. He went back in with a tray with two. So he puts one in front of me, puts one down for himself. So he goes, I want to know what you think of it. So I started, it was very nice. He goes, not just very nice, what do you think? What about the soup? Well, it's soup, isn't it? He goes, what about it? So, it's quite tasty. What does it taste of? There's tomatoes. And it turned out he'd been taking a cookery diploma because he had a half share in a pub, I think in Paisley.
Yeah.
And it was at the time pubs started to introduce people who would make a bit of food.
Yeah.
And if he wanted to interview the chef, he wanted to know how to. And I thought, that is so Fergie.
Yeah.
He's competitive in everything and he has to be the boss.
Yeah. And he did, and you'll know this better than anyone, Roddy, he did create a kind of a siege mentality and a kind of a West of Scotland, you know, bias with the journalists. Were you able to play the double agent?
Well, I was interviewing him one day and he suddenly decided to start on tape, and he said, of course, unless it's Rangers or Celtic up here, we don't get the number 1 journalists. We get the number 2s, sometimes the number 3s, and he started naming names, and you would know the names. And so when this became known, and we didn't use the name bit, but we used it. But you can imagine the various guys that were ahead of me in the business. There was my name on it, and I was able to tell them who he had. You know. Which was, I realised now, that's exactly what he wanted to happen. You know.
In our industry, though, if we had caught wind of that, we'd have been saying, all right, number 4. Just to...
Oh, that happened. And I also remember, there was one day, Dundee United were playing at home, and Jim was a joiner to trade. Anyway, you probably know that he had fitted the director's windows at Tannadice.
Yes.
And he triple glazed them. Anyway, he was banned from the dugout for doing something at one point. He was banned for a couple of months. So he was in the director's box and he had arranged to have a phone link with the dugout. But the players knew that, so they took the phone off the hook so he couldn't phone. And at one point, something was driving him crazy on the pitch and he couldn't get through on the phone, so he was standing up, battering the windows. The whole ground could see him. And Alan Heron of Sunday Mail said, "Behold, Hannibal Lecter." You should explain who Hannibal Lecter is, shouldn't we?
We should explain also that Dundee United beating Barcelona, you know, in the Nou Camp was just extraordinary. And not only that, I think it was Terry Venable's side with Mark Hughes and Lineker. But not only that, you were privy to a group of players. Now, obviously this programme's, you know, we can go out at any time, people can listen to it at any point, so it's irrelevant whether I say yesterday I was actually out for breakfast with Gordon Strachan, Mark McGee and Archie Knox. But of all those players that you see for Dundee United and Aberdeen, to actually sometimes be lucky enough to call some of them friends, they were a great bunch, but they all had that winning determination within them. There was a real edge to them. And if you think about it, the players from Dundee United and Aberdeen, they were absolutely magnificent. I mean, Strachan, chatting to him, I love him, Mark McGee and Alex McLeish. These were the linchpin of a real top draw side.
When you think of Dundee United, the likes of Paul Sturrock, Ralph Milne, people like that, they were a terrific side. And they played Dundee United played in a very specific way. If the ball was coming down the right, so you had Sturrock and Dodds up front, and they would alternate it between them or just give each other a signal. Sometimes one would go for the front post. If one went for the front post, the other one would always drop back.
Yeah.
On the other hand, if the one went for the back post, Luggy would drop off at the front. And the number of times this just caught defenders out, time after time, Manchester United, for example. He caught them out, and I remember the Roma game when Dundee United, the semi-final at Tannadice, the first leg of the semi-final, when it was goalless at half-time, and then Jim had really laced into the team at half-time. They came out and scored 2 goals.
Yeah.
Whereupon the Roma manager said that Dundee United were on the drugs. UEFA will have to investigate this.
Yeah.
And then we discovered later, after the second leg, that the referee had been bribed for the second leg.
Which is incredible when you think about it, Roddy, because you're talking about 1984. When you tell kids of this generation, or even young journalists of this generation, 1984, a year after Fergie's team won the Cup Winners' Cup, United in a semi-final, the European Cup, the Champions League,
should have been up against Liverpool in the final.
Yeah, which is unbelievable. Is there a player that you, in your career, not only built up a good relationship with, but you thoroughly enjoyed watching? You never tire of watching them.
Davy Cooper.
Yeah?
He was a gentleman. Lovely guy. Always called you pal. How you doing, pal? If you phoned him up or something, is that what you need, pal? And so on. And very sociable. And it was so tragic that he literally dropped dead with a brain aneurysm. If he'd been alive, he'd have been working to this day in the media, because he was fan-friendly, media-friendly. Celtic fans would come up to him, tell him he was such and such and such, and ask him for his autograph. He sometimes would sign it with what they'd just called him, and your pal Davy. And so on. A lovely guy and a terrific player, fabulous player.
And even a terrific player at Motherwell when everybody thinks he's gone past his best.
Yes, that's my feeling was that he would have, with Davy, there was always a player that was going to come out, and even if he had retired into what I believe would have been punditry, he would have still had, you sometimes see it with players now, you still know that what they're aching to do is be out there, as all footballers do. I was lucky enough also to cover the '86 World Cup, and I was flying with British Caledonia in an airline. My wife used to work for them, and I was in Dallas. I had to change over in Dallas, and I was sitting in the first class lounge because the BBC had managed to arrange with British Caledonia, and they weren't paying full price for the tickets. But I'm sitting, I'm looking across the lounge, and thinking, that's Pelé. So if it isn't this hell of a like him. So anyway, it turned out, I found out many years later he'd been there to get some sort of medal from a local football club who'd paid him to come up. Anyway, so eventually, but this being the United States, the departure lounge is full of people who have no idea who Pelé is. At that time, soccer was nothing in the US. So eventually I went up and went over to him and said, I'm really sorry to bother you. And he didn't, his expression didn't, he was just stony-faced. I said, but if you are not Pelé, you are his absolute double. He goes, I am Pelé. And he said, I said, I'm working with the BBC, I'm going to cover the World Cup. He said, are you going to Mexico just now? I said, yes, I'm on this flight. He said, so am I. So he said, will you join me? And I thought that was wonderful. I realised later he put me in the outside seat so people wouldn't be able to bother him.
Oh, brilliant.
But we talked, we flew to Mexico City together, and when we got there, I said to him, would you do me one favour, could I interview you, please? And he was really good. He waited in the first class lounge till I got my old not Kubia, the Euro recorder, big heavy thing.
Yeah.
And I got into trouble with the BBC because I interviewed him and I asked him all about Scotland and also who he thought would win the World Cup. And I forgot to ask him about England.
So that
was something that English reporters often did the other way around.
Yeah.
So somewhere in the vaults of the BBC there is an interview where he talks a lot about Scotland. He wanted to know about whiskies, funnily enough. But I forgot to ask, why didn't you ask him about England?
You think about it now, Roddy, you would have taken about 300 selfies with them, wouldn't you?
Oh, no. That's the thing. The invention of the mobile phone and camera phone has changed everything.
Yeah.
In so many ways.
And you've mentioned there two real stalwarts and legends of Scottish football, and you've alluded to the 1986 World Cup. But of course, when I think of, legendary journalists down through the years, you've talked about Ian Archer there, and I automatically think of Archie Macpherson, and their recollection of one of the greatest managers of all time. And you would have encountered Jock Stein.
I did when I was just getting going in the business, and I was lucky. I was asked by BBC Scotland to do the 1982 World Cup in Spain. But this was, the newsroom editor had decided that I should go. It hadn't been the sports department and I wasn't accredited. So I went and covered the World Cup from the stands, basically. But I went with the Scottish team to Portugal. They spent a week in Portugal on the Algarve, preparing, kind of acclimatising. And this wasn't the first time I'd met Jock, but that's the first time I'd been in his company for a while. And the thing was that the press corps, the older hands of reporters, had all booked into a new hotel called the Hotel Algarve. And I was in a little boarding house down the road. And as sometimes happens, luck favours you, because the hotel was new, but the phone system hadn't been fitted properly. Whereas I was in a B&B, you had to pay the guy money, folding money to use and it was through the operator, but I could get on every day. And they were really not happy with that.
Yeah.
And the older guys could really let you know that they weren't happy. But Jock was working this out. And Jock always looked for little divisions and he played people off against each other. So to give you an example with Jock of how he operated, I was doing the interviews for a BBC series called Only a Game, the story of Scottish football. And we had 120 interviews to do. We wrote to 120 managers, players, ex-players. Incidentally, I'll tell you this, only one person didn't do it. He just sent the letter back with the word no scrawled in ink across it. Brian Clough.
Is that right?
Brian Clough. Anyway, so I was doing all these managers and we were over at Celtic Park to interview the then chairman. I can't remember who it was the old families at the time. And you used to have to, when you were in the main stand at Celtic Park, I don't know if you remember the old stand.
Yeah, yep.
There was a wee groundsman's bit, and you had to say you were going in there. So the groundsman was just making his lunch at this point. So he's got a slice of bread, and he puts a slice of ham on top of it, puts another slice of bread, puts a slice of cheese on top of the bread, puts another slice on, then puts some jam on, then puts the top on it. And Jock suddenly appears, and he sees this happening, he goes, aye, miner's piece, a miner's piece, aye, miner's piece. He walks away. So we do the interview with the manager, with the chairman, and then we're down in the old hall with all the pictures and so on. And I said to the director, Mike Alexander, let's hang about because Jock's still around and then he usually makes himself known. So we hung around for a few minutes and then Mike says, oh, come on, we need to go. So we're just getting the stuff. Sure enough, Jock comes sailing through and he passes a picture of the 1966 Scottish Cup winning team and he says, he's not talking to anybody in particular, he's just gazing off into the distance. He goes, people talk about the 67s team, the greatest team. That's the team that started it, and then he disappears. Right? Mike says, what was that about? I says, well, we were supposed to interview him at his home the following week. He died that week.
Wow. In
Cardiff. And I said, what he's doing there is, I'm supposed to talk to him about, I said, see the miners' piece stuff? That's to ask him about his days in the pits.
Yes.
I said, the 67th thing is, I'm supposed to say to him, now, Jock, the 67 team is obviously legendary, but could we talk about the 60? And I said, and he will feign surprise. Well, yes. No.
Guide you through it.
He'll do it. I said, you've got to read Jock, and if you do it, and he knows you're doing it. And on the afternoon, or the day before he died, we were filming Scotland training in Wales, and he was taking penalty kicks against Jim Leighton, but he didn't have the strength anymore to hit the ball from the spot. So he was rolling it forward, and I noticed him eyeing us to see just a wee out the axis. And he started saying, ladies' tee, because he couldn't hit the ball the full 12 yards. And that was one of the signs that he wasn't right.
He wasn't right.
But it was typical of Jock. He wanted the camera, he wanted to take the penalty, but he wanted to excuse himself, you know.
Yeah.
There was all sorts of things.
You were one of the last reporters to chat to him.
I was the last reporter to interview him. And he wanted to talk. He asked us for the interview. It was the Only a Game team, it wasn't news, but Margaret Thatcher had been speaking about, she was the Prime Minister, he loathed Margaret Thatcher.
I'm not surprised.
She was a miner.
Yes.
And she had started talking about identity cards for fans, and Jock was really livid about this. So he started talking, I was asking him a couple of questions, and he turned the subject towards Margaret Thatcher. And one of the strange things is, and this piece of film exists, he was sitting on a typical hotel chair with very narrow legs on it. He put it down. This was September the 10th, beginning of autumn. And although it was a sunny day, the ground was a wee bit damp. And the cameraman, we were using cameras with film and all these things, at one point the cameraman taps my shoulder. He says, "We need to stop the interview." He says, "Jock, you're sinking into the ground." Jock was so heavy. And so the thing was going in, and so we pulled it out, and we were looking for bits of bark from the trees to put under the legs to
keep it stable.
And Jock was down doing it too. I'm going, Jock, will do. He was sweating.
Yeah.
Sweat was falling down. We had to mop him up. And these were all the signs that was what was going to happen that evening.
Yeah. Is that the saddest time for you ever in football?
Yeah, well, when I was a young guy, when I was still at school, I had a bunch of pals, and we used to go to Ibrox, Hampden, Shawfield, Celtic Park. We just liked football.
Yeah.
And on the weekend of the Ibrox disaster, I couldn't get any of them to go because Rangers were so far out of it. Celtic had a big lead. I can't remember what it was, but it was 2 points for a game win in those days, and it was maybe 7 or 8 or 9 points.
Yeah.
So I went on my own that day, and I remember the Rangers fans singing the Northern Lights of Old Aberdeen, because Aberdeen were in second place in the table.
Yeah.
But it was a really dull game, and of course there was the 2 last-minute goals, of course, or the last-minute goal, Colin Stein. Anyway, I used to wait and let the crowd move on. I didn't want to go and get the subway at the old Copeland Road because I was worried about the crushes and possibly. So I was waiting, and I walked right past Stairway 13 at the top after the disaster had happened, and there was no sign of it inside the ground.
Is that right?
And I walked down Stairway 19. I'd been away over at the other side, walked down Stairway 19 and along Paisley Road. Didn't know anything. I was maybe 2 or 3 subway stations along when I heard sirens, and I thought, oh, there's been trouble. And yet it wasn't a day. Rangers had no stake in the game.
Nothing at stake, yeah.
It was a very still day. It was a very mild midwinter's day, no wind. And I heard the sirens, and I thought, my goodness, there's been trouble. And I was going to my youth club to play snooker, and when the first Evening Times come in saying 60, and I thought, that's what it is. By the time I finished playing snooker that night, 66 people. So I think that was, the fact that if you'd just taken the wrong turn and go down those stairs,
yeah,
you wouldn't be sitting doing this.
Absolutely. I've got to ask you, we've got a couple of things I want to get before we finish, Roddy. Obviously, you've mentioned great managers, some great players that you've seen. Is there one in particular that you've seen in real life that you'd never tire off, that just was a joy? I mean, Pelly's hard to beat, but from a point of view of you've actually reported on somebody, you think,
Messi and Maradona, I suppose.
Yeah.
Maradona came to Glasgow, I don't know if you remember that.
Yes, I do.
Wasn't very chatty. Claudio Caniggia lived down the lane behind my house when he was in Glasgow. We were getting the kitchen done up, and I was saying there was a couple of Rangers supporters joining us. I was saying, there's Claudio Caniggia. Aye, so it is. If you don't look, you won't see him.
You know, Claudio Caniggia is in Argentina going, I live just behind Roddy Forsyth. But
you were talking about people who I love to see, and mentioned Davy Cooper.
Yeah.
Davy was absolutely fabulous. I thoroughly enjoyed watching him.
Yeah.
He's the one that always sticks out in my mind. Gaza was, of course.
Yeah.
Sometimes people have asked me for a typical memory, and of course there was that goal against Aberdeen where he ran most of the length of the field and beat every Aberdeen player his way. But the memory that sticks in my mind was when you go into the main door, which there's a famous staircase, and he was sitting on the staircase, and he had some kind of tuner with an aerial, and he was playing about with it. And I said to McCoist, what's he doing? He says he's trying to tune into Waters' phone calls, find out what they're making, so he can ask for a rise. Paul Gascoigne was that.
Bonkers. Yeah.
But yeah, what a great player he was too.
He's fantastic.
And Henrik.
Listen, you're rhyming off players from a generation that we will never see the like again. There was a rich period of Scottish football that you thought, I can't believe we're watching these players. Is there a game? We've done everything from managers to players. Is there a game that you've covered that you thought, thank you, I've been working at this?
I think the Cup Winners' Cup final in '83, just to see, which remains to this day the last European final that Real Madrid ever lost, to this day. And it was just the fact that everything was lovely about it. The fishing fleet had come in from Aberdeen. The guys that didn't normally go to games were there. The Swedes were on Aberdeen's side. Of course, Fergie was the manager. I was working with a guy called Peter Jones, and I learned a commentating trick from him. It wasn't my style, but I don't know if you remember Peter, he was famous for, and Smith must score.
Yes.
Poor Gordon Smith had to put up with it, because he did score in that game. He said, nobody ever remembers that.
No, Gordon highlighted it to me several times.
One of the things that Peter Jones would do, he would commentate as though something was about to happen when it had already happened. So he'd say, and Peter Martin rises, he'll head the ball, but you'd already headed it.
Yes.
And he knew if it was a goal or not, And he just had this little delays to allow him to do an even better finish. And there's the goal, blah, blah, blah. He died during the boat race. Oxford came in, he suffered a heart attack. And
wow.
Died doing what he loved doing, being a commentator.
Young journalists will look and they'll say, wow, what a lucky period for you as a broadcaster, and being able to write as well and being able to mix both skills. It's a tough game now for young journalists to get into, really tough. Although there is such a wide and varied amount of courses that people can take, our industry is going through a massive transition. Apart from the fact that kids will study and they may well get qualifications, what do you think would be the best advice that Roddy Forsyth can hand over to someone that they could bear in mind? Well,
something that I always used to say before this change happened, I would say to younger journalists, if you want to get the feel for what you're covering, and sometimes you will get exclusive stories, and an exclusive still an exclusive, whether you're putting it out on a podcast or social media or whatever you're doing, I say to them, go have a look at things like the SFA committee members, and you'll find people from Alloa, Peterhead. Drop in on them at their clubs, or drop in them, because they're not getting the bunch of people that turn up at Ibrox and Parkhead or for a Scotland game. There'll very often be nobody but yourself there. But everybody in football likes to gossip. And they will tell you things, and they really like to tell you things, and they'll be so glad that you came. You hear aspects of things that nobody else will hear.
Yeah.
Then you can do your social media. Then you can say, I heard it from a, as I used to say, don't even say I heard it from a source. Just say, I understand, or it is understood. Then nobody knows where you got it.
I'm led to believe.
And one of the things I used to say is, if I was asking somebody, a football manager or a director or an executive or an official, for their phone number, I used to say to them, I won't phone you for anything trivial. I'll only phone you if it's something that you probably want to say something about. If I mess you about, you need never answer the phone again. But if you mess me about, I'll never feel I need to phone you again.
Yes.
So this is an exchange of what we're doing. And I found that was a very effective way to deal with people.
Yeah. It helps also if you have a good manner, a good reputation. I think there's always, as you know, in our industry, you build up your own amount of contacts through trust.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Yeah.
You know?
So if you mess them about, they don't answer. And the word gets about. The other thing that I would say, and this concerns you, it's easier for somebody working for the likes of the BBC, because you have this massive organisation behind them. You've done this for yourself. You've built this for yourself on your own reputation and entirely upon that. I think that's a very significant example to show younger journalists, this is what you can do, not as opposed to this is what you can do on somebody else's behalf. This is what you can do.
Let me ask you about something that troubled me at the time, but I think out of respect for you, I would not broach the subject because I was waiting for you to divulge to me what was happening to you. I was in your company and I spotted a little tremor in your hand, and I naturally worried about it at the time. And then as time has moved on, eventually you talk about Parkinson's disease. What, first of all, happened at that point where you knew something was wrong? Before the tremor, there are something like 40 different symptoms of Parkinson's. Nobody gets them all. Everybody gets a few. So you often talk to other Parkinson's people who've got it, and you don't have the same things, and you're on different medications. So I lost my sense of taste and smell. And my wife began to notice what is known as a Parkinson's symptom called masking. Your face gets less and less expressive. Your mouth tends to be more like that. Your speech becomes huskier. It's doing that to me just now. And
the tremors begin at some stage during that. I'm not too bad. I have a fair old tremor on the left side, but I'm not too bad. I'm 7 or 8 years into this now. And I also, at the same time, began to suffer from osteoarthritis. And it was really hard to do. It would be hard for anybody to deal with, but I was physically fit. I was still playing football. I could still ride a bike, cliff scrambling, things like that. I was playing summer hockey. I really loved playing summer hockey and enjoying it. And I had to stop that. My PD consultant has said to me, if you hadn't been so fit, you'd have felt this much more. Physical fitness is one of the best things about Parkinson's. But the other aspect of this is my sister, who's 6 years younger than me, also a broadcaster and a very good one in her day, has got early onset Alzheimer's. She had to quit the BBC about 18 months ago. There is no history in our family of Alzheimer's or Parkinson's. What is happening? These are the two fastest growing neurological degenerative diseases in the world. Why? Nobody knows. They affect the brain in similar ways, and they are doubling in incidences every generation. Now, one of the things they do know about either or both diseases is if you have any early symptoms or anything that would even make you think it might just be a symptom, get it checked, because the earlier you check it, the easier it is to hinder it, to hold it back. So
let me ask you, this is kind of tapping into your psychology as a person. You say you've no history in the family, and of course everybody will know Janice and how well respected she is as well. Do you feel anger? Was that an initial feeling?
We have talked about it, Janice and I, and she has expressed more than I have done, because I've come into it more gradually, but she's younger than I am and would have worked a few years longer. And she has said a few times how angry this makes her, especially with the two of us, because we used to make each other laugh a lot, and just with the same sense, brother and sister,
Yeah.
So from that point of view, yes, I don't find myself getting angry, but there are days, one was last week, where I just suddenly turned around to Mary, and that's my wife, and just said, it just gets to you some days, you're thinking, because you've got to deal with it all the time. I wasn't sure that we could sit and do this today. When I was coming in, driving in, I thought, I'm going to have to say to Peter, I don't think I can do it. But sometimes it just, you summon enough adrenaline up and it gets you through it. And I haven't been stuttering too much or slurring the words, I hope anyway.
I actually, although, I think we talked about this actually years ago. Talked about this a good 3 or 4 years ago when I wanted to actually try and get you into chat. And I was very conscious of the fact that you would be coming here and maybe, there's a worry over certain things, but I can tell you right now, this is flown in. We've only got 5 minutes to go, and I could have had another hour with you, Roddy. But I wonder on that point, on dealing with it, medicine, AI, the advancement of, trying to maybe not find a cure, but slow things down. Is that where we are with you at the moment?
Yes. One of the good things about AI is it processes data so quickly that now across the world, where there are experiments going on or research work going on, where it might have taken 3, 4, sometimes up to 10 years to process all the data and recheck it, AI is speeding through it. So not only the disease that I've got or Alzheimer's, other diseases, cancer for example, they are now speeding data and results at such a speed that it would previously have taken generations to get through them. So it might come a little too late for the likes of myself, but it will happen at some stage. At least I certainly hope to be able to see it. You've got to die something, and we all have to go one day.
Yeah.
You hope to have your faculties as long as possible.
But I would, and I am grateful to you for the compliment you paid me a few minutes ago, but I'd equally like to pay you the compliment of, with this disease comes inspiration. We've been talking about the fact that Michael J. Fox has been a pioneer of saying, listen, accept me as a person, for what I achieved, but this is also me.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Don't lose sight of it. Yes. Roddy Forsyth is still Roddy Forsyth to me. So you'll be an inspiration to people on, how you go about your daily life, how you say to people, I've got it, but I'm still here. I still have something to offer.
Well, I still, for example, go to games because even if BBC in Northern Ireland asked me to do a little summary each week, and I'm so grateful to them for that because it gives me something to do that I can, as you know, it's nice to focus on something. So I'll be at the Old Firm game on Sunday at Hampden. You don't want to miss games like that, especially not in the circumstances of this week, you know, with lovers' tiffs going on, and quite extraordinary, isn't it? So I was actually trying to work out, I'm going to a game and your old instincts kick in, thinking, how many full-time managers of Rangers had this season this year, up against a team who brought a 74-year-old man, 73-year-old man back who left 20 years ago to replace another fellow countryman who got into a civil war with an Irishman about who said what, and nobody's saying who anybody is, and thinking, this is fantastic. You know, think of the fun you will have with that. You know.
It's no surprise that Neil Doncaster said it's per head of population. It's the most popular, because I, like you, have witnessed madness down through the years. It just keeps on giving, this game.
It never stops, does it? You know, and of course we haven't even mentioned Hearts at that point. You know, but you look at this, and of course Martin O'Neill is an entertainer. He gives the media what they want. He's a soundbite and visual man and so on. But as I was saying, what I would always say to younger journalists, store things up. Go and talk to people who don't usually speak to the media or are spoken to. There are clubs with scarcely any online existence. Pop by there every so often. At least pop by enough to get the phone number.
Yeah.
You know, but there's nothing like going for a cup of tea. And I do remember once when Ali MacLeod was at Airdrie. Am I right in saying Ali MacLeod was at Airdrie? My mind goes sometimes, but I'm pretty sure it was at Airdrie. And I visited him, and when I went into the office, his secretary, his door was shut, and his secretary, I said, I'm here to see Ali. She says, right. She's on the phone. She says, when you go and ask him about the Queen. I said, what? She goes, ask him about the Queen. Just ask him about the Queen. I said, what? She says, just the Queen. So she says, right, you can go in. So I went in, I'm sitting down, I'm talking to Ali, having a chat. And at the end of it, saying, I'm just packing my stuff. And I said, what about the Queen, eh? He goes, oh, aye. Me and Faye, they'd been invited through to a garden party.
Ah, yeah.
Or at least he thought it was a garden party, but it turned out there was only 6 other people, 3 couples. So he said, well, we're sitting with the Queen and the Duke. He says, I'm sitting next to the Duke. And he's saying to me, oh, I know what it's like to do your job. He says, because after Argentina, Ali got pelters.
Yes.
He says, I'm the Duke of Edinburgh. I get this and that. He says, so we're really good chatting. He says, Queen and the Faye and the Queen are swapping recipes. He says, we're chatting. He says, anyway, he says, it's come near the end of it. He says, and he says to me, see if you're in London, you've not got anywhere to stay. He says, give us a bell and you can, give us a bell and you can crash at our place. Pause. He goes, of course, they only say that because you know you will only do it. I'm the only person in the world listening to this right now.
That's comedy gold.
That's why you should go to clubs where people aren't always getting visits.
Yeah.
You know.
Listen, it's been an absolute joy, Roddy. I'm just going to finish on one, what I would call your classic shoot and match weekly question.
Okay.
I've done everything from the highs and lows, players, managers. Is there a goal that sticks in your mind that you either commentated on it or you witnessed it and you think, I'll never forget it?
If I say to you no, but there is a golf stroke, and I made the golf stroke, and I'll tell you why. I don't play golf.
Right.
But one of my jobs used to be to cover the Scottish Open, which, as you know, is the week before the main Open. And it was at Gleneagles, and I was staying at the Gleneagles Hotel. And there's a pitch and putt course there. There was, I don't know if there is now, it's been a long time. Anyway, this pitch and putt course, and I found that every time I went out on it, the 6th hole, I was doing very well. I was practically holing in one almost every time, getting close to it. And it was set in a little hollow embankment with a walk path above it. So anyway, I played my chip. And this time it didn't roll back down the hollow, it stopped. So I went up, steadied myself, and I tapped using the putter. It followed the runnels of the grass. And then when it hit the green, picked up speed, and it was straight in the hole. And from behind me, I heard. And when I turned around, it was Seve Ballesteros. And he said, I could not have done better. Now, I didn't know there was going to be picture camera phones, and I wish to God I'd be able to take one back then, because it was so wonderful, you know.
Roddy,
Seve Ballesteros.
there are 2 moments in your life where I wish you had an iPhone. Pele, when you're in the airport, and Seve Ballesteros. It doesn't get any better.
By the way, the next time I saw him, or the next tournament I saw him in, was Ayrshire. I think it must have been Turnberry. And Tom Watson, Sorry if I'm holding this.
No, you're not.
The last anecdote, Tom Watson had sent an open letter to the Royal and Ancient about the quality of the rough. He felt it was too harsh and punitive. And he had said that it was bad for the spectators, it was ruining the spectacle for them. So I was at the recorder's hat and Murdoch was the producer again. So Sevy was coming out and says, mind and ask him about Tom Watson's letter. So I'm asking Sevy about his round. Murdoch says, ask him about Tom Watson's letter. So I said, now Sevy, one last thing to ask you. Tom Watson has written an open letter to the Royal and Ancient criticising the quality of the rough. He says it's punitive, it's difficult for the players and it makes it very difficult for the spectators. What do you think? He goes, I don't know, they let me in for free. And that was Sevy.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant. What a lot of people will not know, and this is the ultimate, as I look to the camera there, because he's the old pro, he's looking thinking, he's gone through here, he's checking everything, and he's got a countdown from somebody in his ear. Don't you worry about it. Those stories have been magnificent and we're not on it any kind of a time limit. Roddy Forsyth, it's been an absolute blast. I have loved every story. I think you're an inspiration to people getting into the industry, working in the industry, and of course, you know, that trip down memory lane is an absolute joy. Thank you for being my guest.
That's the non-shaky hand. So,
brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it very much.
No problem. Thank you to Roddy Forsyth. Thank you for listening and watching.